Affordable Housing Debt Panel. We have a fantastic group of panelists up here. I'll let them introduce themselves in a minute. But they just want to give a quick overview of what we'll be doing going over, which is we're just really going through scenarios for different types of financing scenarios for affordable housing. We'll talk through financing bond deals, 4% deals. We'll talk through financing 9% deals. We'll look at some short-term, flexible capital options for acquisitions, bridge loans, and then we'll also talk about preservation deals, refinances. We're looking to put long-term debt on projects. We'll call it with one of those agencies, and then towards the end, we'd like to just end with 5 to 10 minutes of questions from you folks. So just get started. I did want to try to get a feel on who's all here, what kind of, who you work for, and just so we can tailor some of the questions and some of the conversations towards that. So by show of hands, could I see how many people are here with developers? And then what about lenders, brokers, equity? Okay, so a good mix between those two. That's pretty good. First off, CPE code for this is 0964. My name is Peter Brennan. I'm the manager of finance at Kittle Property Group. Been there 6 years. I handle managing all the debt and equity placements for our affordable transactions and also manage the conversions and refinances throughout our portfolio. So I'll start with Jim, let him introduce himself, and then after this we'll get into each topic.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Jim Gillespie. I'm Executive Vice President for Bellwether Enterprise Real Estate Capital. We are a national commercial banking firm, and our biggest shareholder is Enterprise Community Partners. So we are affiliated with their syndication platform. We're also owned 15% approximately by Fifth Third Bank. So we, in affordable financing space, we have all of the agency licenses, Fannie, Freddie, FHA, proprietary debt products, and then I also run our direct loan purchase program.
Hi there, Mike Dury, Merchants Capital. We are 100% owned by Merchants Bank of Indiana. So we also at Merchants Capital have Fannie, Freddie, FHA. We do direct bond purchase, but we're owned by a bank. 100% Merchants Bank of Indiana is the name of the bank, where we do construction, bridge, equity bridge, land loans, the things to help facilitate affordable housing.
Hi, I'm Brian Dunlap, and I'm the president and CEO of River Hills Bank. We are a small community bank that is located just east of Cincinnati, and we are primarily involved in construction of 9% and perm portfolio loans on the 9% side. So we kind of represent the conventional construction to perm product for 9% in particular, and we are kind of expanding a little bit into the 4% world. But yeah, mainly the 9% construction and perm, and that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we're going to start with financing 4% bond deals. I think two of the most common executions are with agency, Freddie and Fannie. Mike and Jim, both offer those within their companies. So, Mike or Jim, you want to start with some of the trends and some of the trends you're seeing with those options, and just how those executions are going today?
Yeah, sure. Just from a high level, what we'll do when we see a bond deal is we'll run it 3 different ways primarily. We'll look at it as a Fannie M-TEP, we'll look at it as a Freddie TEL, and we'll look at it as a private placement, and then we'll share that with the developer. That comes down in the spreadsheet will show what the net benefit of each transaction. We kind of use that as a placemat for discussion with our developers. What deal works, which structure works best for each execution. So let's should we just dive into kind of one execution to talk about MTEPs first?
Yeah, I was gonna just real high level, if you don't mind. So
Yeah.
high level, the way, the structure, it's interesting. At the end of the day, you've got the MTEP, which is, immediate funded, almost forward loan, the TEL's a forward loan. You've got all these different structures. At the end of the day, when you really look at these, they're very close. Now, there are times when Fannie becomes more aggressive than Freddie and vice versa. But it's almost like, hey, developer, what do you prefer, Fannie or Freddie? They kind of look very similar at the end of the day in terms of net benefit. But essentially, when we do, don't want to repeat what Jim said, we do something similar. We're looking at each structure, right? We'll add an FHA and then we'll add our equity platform because there are certain, to get a certain price on your equity, you may need to give up the construction loan to an investor. And so if you give up the construction loan to an investor, you may not want to do a private placement structure that then would take your construction loan. So there's a lot that goes into this. When I start looking at Fannie and Freddie, the TEL and MTEP, the TEL is a tax-exempt loan, the MTEP, they're the bonds. So with the TEL, it's a forward funding. And typically on a bond deal, you're probably at least 30 to 36 months. Freddie doesn't like going beyond 36 months. Fannie will, but they don't love it. So you're forward rate locking. So anytime you forward rate lock, there's going to be a premium to that interest rate. But because it's a forward loan and it's unfunded, there's no neg arb or anything there, but your rate is worse. With Fannie, your loan's funded day one into a cash collateral reserve, so because it's funded day one, your interest rate is better. So we're always looking at the delta of the rate between TEL and MTEP, but then you have the neg arb, right? You have the cost of that immediate funding. So then you're juggling, okay, well, I've got a better rate with Fannie, but it's more expensive because there's bonds, there's issuance costs, there's other things that are associated with bonds, taxes and bonds. So you're just kind of weighing the cost benefit there. And, so that's just the kind of the game we play when we start looking at these. And then we go in and try to push. There are other factors involved in that, but that's kind of, I think, just higher level how it's, and at the end of the day, it's funny, Jim, maybe you see this too, it's, they're just not too dissimilar. Recently, Freddie Mac pulled back on the forwards, so the Fannie MTEP has been winning today, but we're already seeing spreads come in with Freddie Mac. And so now we're seeing, you could potentially see a shift back, but that's kind of the scope of the name of the game with the agencies, and that's why you got to go with both of them.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I would echo, I think 2019, I think the majority of our business was, on these types of deals was Freddie Mac, and this year it's clearly shifted to Fannie. Maybe it's worth talking for a second about kind of rates.
Yeah.
On forward MTEPs today, I'm going to say around 3.25. On a forward TEL, it's much wider. I'd say like 420. So, like Mike was saying, there's what you pick up in kind of proceeds and rate on the MTEPs. You lose a little bit of that in transaction costs and neg arb.
So to add to that, think about that for a second, right? We'll just dissect what Jim just said. You've got a worse rate with Freddie, better rate with Fannie. Okay, so if you're debt service constrained on your mortgage, you may want to, it may be more advantageous to go with Fannie Mae because that will allow you to generate more loan proceeds. And it would allow you to generate more loan proceeds that offset the neg arb. So the net proceeds to you as a developer is better for less fee. The other thing Fannie Mae is doing is they're allowing you, when you go to issue the bonds, you can issue the bonds at a premium and offset that some of those bond costs. And so I think the last time we looked at this, the neg arb was around 2% for a 30-month forward, something like that. So that's the cost of that neg arb, which is really your interest rate minus your GNS, and then you take those proceeds and you invest them into a reinvestment rate, and the delta is your neg arb, right? So it's a cost for that immediate fund. It's a cost for that better interest rate, essentially. So if you're then allowed to sell those bonds at a premium, you can offset that cost. So it's like, oh, but then it's funny, you sell the bonds at a premium, your rate goes up, and it becomes a little closer to Freddie, right? So it's playing the structure game, and the agencies will get aggressive for certain sponsors in certain locations. It's not like HUD. HUD, it's a funded with a Ginnie Mae. Really, the developer doesn't matter as much. If HUD approves your loan, the lender, Bellwether or Merchants Capital goes and locks your interest rate with the Ginnie Mae investor, and it's more homogenous, so to speak. With Fannie and Freddie, they'll come out and maybe say, oh, in this market, I'll do it for your aunt, or I'll get more IO in this market. So it's very dependent upon market and sponsor, and that's why, again, getting with someone like Jim or Merchants, really trying to go at both agencies. What is the best execution?
Probably worth noting, both the MTEDs and the TEL are available on an immediate basis. That have to be a tenant-in-place rehabs. Typically, we haven't done a ton of them, but a number of them, and they've all been Section 8 properties.
Jim or Mike, are you seeing a big difference in just rates or other terms between an immediate and forward, between Freddie and Fannie?
Yes.
What is that difference?
So on the immediate MTEDs today, I just heard in the 4% panel that they had locked an immediate like 270 to 275 versus 3 and 4. So there's none they got.
Because when you have an immediate, you can, Fannie Mae is saying that there's enough in-place cash flow. That's what we see a lot of this with Section 8, Project 8, Section 8. There's enough in-place cash flow to support the debt day one. And so, therefore, you don't have to do this forward cash collateralized. The funds are out day one, and the project can support it, so you don't have neg ARM. So not only is there a better interest rate, but there's no neg ARM. With Freddie and Mac, there was never neg ARM, right? Remember we talked about the TEL being a forward loan, not bonds. So with the TEL, now you've got an immediate funding, not a forward funding. When you're funding 36 months out, investors are hedging that, and they're trying to figure out where rates will be in 36 months. So there's a premium to your interest rate. Well, that premium is gone when you're going to immediately fund a deal. Again, so yeah, immediates, if we always try to fit deals in, it works into the immediate box, then you get a taxable equity bridge behind it, right? And this is where in the HUD world, the 223F plays really well. You don't use prevailing wage, which I would venture to guess, I was talking with a rather prominent market rate developer here in Indy. Prevailing wage was always the hot button, that's why people don't use HUD. But we've seen costs go up so much that I don't believe there's a big delta between prevailing wage and just the market construction wages. There's a new survey coming out from the DOL, I think next week, where really our eyes are going to be all over that. So I think you're going to see D4 execution even pick up more, especially in Indiana, because that's been really punitive in recent years. But the D4, for example, is pricing in the 2s, with a 40-year amortization, and there's no LTV test. So you're going 2% to, call it 250, 275, to a 115 debt service coverage out of 40 amortization, and there's no LTV test. So when you talk about these deals needing leverage, because you have, especially on the new construction side, but I can see a resurgence in the D4, and we're very fortunate here in the Midwest to have the best HUD office by far, where there's no queue. So if you're trying to do deals across the country, there's a massive queue at these various HUD offices. And you could sit behind 90 projects. Now they're prioritizing affordable stuff, but still it's painful. With the Chicago HUD office, there's no queue, and they're good. So I can see that come back a little bit.
Yeah, sticking with the D4, just wanted to touch on some of the, I know one thing when you talk about HUD, you always think of long closing timelines. Are there any other challenges? Prevailing wage, what other challenges are you seeing with D4 executions? Or
Challenges?
No challenges?
No. Prevailing wage is the big one, and I really would love feedback from some of the developers out there, because I think a lot of folks, especially in the energy sector, can't be people. But what's happening with the inflation and construction costs over the last, really since COVID hit, I think, again, we're going to find more out here, but we're seeing more, we're seeing market rate developers use D4 again, which again, I never thought I'd see. In Indiana. So prevailing wage, maybe not so much. Timing is always a factor. HUD's the due diligence is a little more difficult. But when you have a Section 8 project where maybe you have a transfer of the existing contract, which can take time, usually HUD is when you're doing with preparing with new tax credits, it's fine. You can manage that, all right. Again, like I said, when you can fit it in F to an F, that has been a great where you don't have to use prevailing wage when prevailing wage had a premium. The other thing is, there's heavy reserves. So HUD requires you to have your construction contract bonded, which a lot of investors require anyways, but they require that or a letter of credit for the construction contract, and then they have heavy operating deficit working capital reserves. Our bank issues letters of credit in lieu of those reserves, which can alleviate some of that pain. These are outside of the investor health reserves. So that heavy reserves on rehabs, HUD can be tough, making sure you can relocate the residents, but so can Fannie and Freddie. That's not really specific to HUD. Fair housing, HUD enforces fair housing much more than Fannie Freddie. But again, typically with Section 8 tax credit bureaus, you don't see that. That's more of a conventional thing.
And one thing you mentioned that just caught my eye was, you mentioned no LTV test for the D4. So how exactly are those sized? Is it by cost or?
Debt service coverage and loan and cost. And when you have 4% tax credit equity coming in, very rarely are you going to be loan and cost. We've seen some scenarios where we're high in NOI, or maybe tax abatement, where you're going to underwrite a tax abatement. We've seen this outside of Indiana, where then you become loan and cost constrained. So yeah, 987 loan and cost and 115 debt service coverage.
Great. The next execution with bond deals I want to discuss with private placement. I feel like it's every other week that someone's reaching out to my boss with a new private placement execution that we're taking a look at. Do you want to talk about the market for that, Jim? And
Yeah,
what
sure.
you're seeing?
Yeah, it's definitely becoming more competitive. It used to be primarily there was the banks and a few funds that focused on the private placement market. What it is you're basically placing the bonds, unrated fixed rate bonds with an investor. Whether that's the bank you're dealing with or like with us, we place those bonds with a handful of different investors. The bonds are fixed, the rate's fixed at closing. It's a construction to perm execution. Leverage is 90% and 115 coverage. 40-year amortization is standard with most private placement executions. We're closing a deal across the river in Louisville, hopefully next week. It's around a 4% fixed rate, 40-year amortization, but we're doing 8 years of interest only, 3 years during the renovation period, plus 5 years during the perm period. So that certainly helps with repayment of the deferred fee if there is any. But I think the benefit of that product is the flexibility with it relative to some of the agencies. I know what we can do is we can lend up. I know Freddie on a TEL execution will allow you to lend up to 10% if your rents come in higher. With private placement with our investors, we've got a tremendous amount of flexibility. If you have bonds, you can lend up at stabilization or potentially add a tax penalty.
So yeah, I want to expand on that. That's interesting. And again, to be clear here, we're talking about, you underwrite a deal, day one, closing construction, maybe, you're at max rents, and all of a sudden you have AMI growth over that 3-year period. Jim, I think what I'm hearing is if your project achieves those higher rents, which were higher than underwritten rents, and then of course your expenses come on at pro forma or below, there's a potential where you can essentially earn more loan dollars. Right. And the agencies allow within a certain threshold of private placement, and does it have a cap in terms of 20%?
Dare I say not really? If you have bonds, if you've got a lot of bonds, the short-term bonds, 50% bonds outstanding, that makes it a lot easier. So,
Jim, you mentioned flexibility many times with the private placement, and with a lot of developers being in here. Wanted to ask, have you seen any private placements that are willing to underwrite future year rents at this point, or would that be the next step?
we haven't, we're not underwriting to future rents, but we'll give you the benefit if you actually prove it out, and we'll pay.
But I think with the private placement, again, we've seen a huge resurgence of it. We've seen, Jim, we talked about this even almost for full-term IO in some instances, which we don't even get into that execution. Creative ways on how you figure value. I'm seeing, here's where your LTV is, and I'm reading this thing wow, that's creative to say the least. Whereas Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae are going to be at your restricted NOI, a cap rate, your restricted value. So in instances where you have LTV constraints, that can be really attractive when you need leverage on highly levered bond deals. The one thing that I've seen is we've gotten down the road with a private placement structure, and all of a sudden we find out, oh, well, the investor through some syndicator needs the construction loan and it's not available because the private placement, they're going to fund it's almost construction converts. It's like B4, right, where it's a construction loan funded, you draw and then converts. Well, all of a sudden now the investor can only take the equity bridge, not the construction loan. Therefore, the price is reduced. So just some things to be aware of when you're going in, eyes wide open when you're going into these deals, that your perm debt really does affect even pricing on your equity, and make sure that you really understand all of that.
That's it. One benefit of working with a shop like ours or Mike's is we've got a variety of different products. I know we had 2 deals that got really just bogged down with FHA last year that we switched over to private placement. So kind of having that flexibility midstream if you had to. Nobody likes that, but it's good to have the option.
Well, and I will say, part of the reason there was a resurgence in private placement is because Fannie and Freddie, especially Freddie Mac, they were not as competitive. They got incredibly conservative on their forward production and had to do with the caps put on them by FHFA. So on the equity panel, they talked about the Supreme Court ruling, which now, with Director Calabria is out, they have a new FHFA director, and we're already seeing the caps sort of increased for the agencies by equity. And so I think we're going to see more aggressive spreads in the Fannie and Freddie in our quotes. We're already seeing this. We saw a reduction in forward pricing. So, part of the reason why people have gone private placement is because Freddie Mac, they're almost out of the forward game. I think they're going to come back in and compete a little more so. I think they're going to have to, and I think either affordable, the scorecard comes out, the scorecard, FHFA scorecard comes out usually around like HFY later on this year. So, the thought is either that affordable becomes uncapped or they really increase the goals for affordable housing in the GSEs. And in doing that, you're going to have decreased spreads. And I was funny, we have, as our Freddie Mac affordable lender, we have housing goals every year, right? And for the first time, I'm sitting in our meeting with Freddie Mac executives, and it didn't feel like goals, it felt like an allocation. It was very bizarre, where it's like, here, we're giving you this, but you don't have to get there, where it's, in the years past, it's like, you gotta get there, you better show us how you're gonna get there. Now, like, if you don't use it, that's okay. It was just really bizarre, so you just saw this sort of the risk just switched, and that's why, as Jim said, all our business, we were like 75-25, and now we're 75-25 with Fannie, and I think it'll come back and then start to compete with some of the private placement.
I think a lot of that too has to do with them managing forward risk on their balance sheet. Freddie's had, so much forward risk they don't get need anymore, so that's increasing.
And so what that means is they have these allocations, right, $80 billion each. Well, they count that when the loan's funded. So if you have a forward loan, it's counted when your loan converts. So everyone can appreciate this. We've seen, due to COVID and other things, construction delays. And so all of a sudden, Freddie Mac thinks they have X billion dollars converting in 2021, and it turns out all those are going to be slipped to 2022. So as a lender, I know Jim probably did the same thing. We're having to really do a good job communicating with Freddie and Fannie, saying, okay, this one's going to slip, we need an extension, so they know what their funded volumes are going to be. Because all of a sudden, if you have $1 billion that slips to 2022, all of a sudden you're $1 billion short of your housing goal, and that is not good. So that also happened where that's why they got real conservative on their forward pricing, because they were, they didn't know kind of where their goals would be and their cash would be with that HFA.
Great. I think we've covered 4% pretty well. Let's touch on 9% deals and financing those now. Brian, I know with River Hills you've got a lot of experience there. Can you talk about some of those products that you've worked through, some of those structures?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, you guys are so smart. I understood more than half of the acronyms you guys understood. And I mean, just the level of information, I'm so glad I said I'm on this panel. This is great. I feel like I could probably do it with Bondio now. Also, Peter, thank you for not asking me any questions about 4%. But yeah, the 9% is kind of the easy world, at least in terms of what I've just heard today. It's pretty traditional. Construction perm loan is what we offer at River Hills Bank. We do a lot of work in various states, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, mostly. And we do mostly portfolio. So it's very attractive for smaller perm in particular to do a portfolio or find a portfolio lender. A lot of the larger institutions don't like the small firms and a lot of the folks that deal with the Freddie and Fannie don't do the smaller perm loans. And so we've found a niche in that market, done a lot of firms in Indiana over the years, and the majority of the firms in Ohio over the years. We're also very active in the construction side of things. We've seen construction rates about 4%-ish is your traditional construction rate today. On the perm portfolio side, we see anywhere from 4.20 to 5%, which again isn't competitive, but if it's a $600,000 loan, you guys are trying to do that with all the costs associated. Your all-in is probably going to be 6%.
Yeah, I'll argue it is competitive, right? Because you're talking about even up to $3 million or so, even $5 million, where you have the agency's forward 9%, Fannie and Freddie, somewhere around 4.75, 5. So if his rate's 4.20 to 5, but then you have expensive legal, all this, the timing, all the other headaches that go along with doing loans with federal agencies. You can sign up for a bank deal. That's really good.
Yeah, and so we try to be competitive, and we actually don't charge any fees for perm loans, for origination, or any actually fees for a perm loan, 0 fees.
No legal?
Not if we do construction.
Okay.
So we wrap it all up into the construction side of things, and charge no fees. We do have a product that we do charge a 1% origination fee, and what that product does is allow you to have no prepayment penalty for up to 6 months after you fund the loan. And what's really cool there is, say it's a $2.5 million deal, everybody underwrites to our interest rates, and that interest rate might be 4.50, and everybody underwrites their own interest rates, everybody likes their interest rates. We actually close the deal at the same time as construction, and then once the construction is done and the project is stabilized, and they sometimes fund the firm for FHLB purposes and stuff like that to get those points. But then we partner with one of these very smart gentlemen over here who then take out that on an immediate at 320 is what I saw. And all of a sudden that debt service on that project goes from 115 to 220. And it just cash flows like mad. So that's been a really successful product. I think you said earlier merchants offer something similar to that, but we've been doing that product in Ohio for 8+ years, and it's been really, really successful. And at the end of the day, if say the immediates go up, we just fund your loan and off we go, and everybody's happy because we all underwrote to that original rate. So,
Brian, would you do that if you weren't doing the construction? Or if you have to be the construction lender as well?
So we're not really after the firm. We're primarily a construction lender. That said, we're relationship based. It's we're this small bank, and we are truly, our motto is relationships matters, and so we are a bank that, it depends. If we've got a strong relationship with that individual developer, and we've worked with you in the past, and we're excited to work with you again, is the important part, then yeah, absolutely, we'd be glad to fit you into that program. Unlike, I think, some of our competitors, and I don't want to throw that out there because there's a lot of bankers, raise their hand, but some of our competitors that are larger institutions are less flexible or creative than we are. And that's what really has led us to dominate, a large part of the Ohio market, and now I'm at the Indiana conference, so we'll see. But yeah, it's been fun getting to know a lot of the Indiana developers and tell them about who we are and what we've done over the last 8 years in Ohio to really upset change and disrupt that market. And it's just creativity and flexibility that's done that for us. But overall, it's a fairly simple execution on the construction side. I think I said rates are 4%, expect about a 1% origination fee. We do something really weird. We cap our legal at $15,000, no matter how complicated the deal is. on a 9% deal. And that's just to stop the lawyers from fighting with each other quite so much.
Brian, are you guys doing floating rates at 4%? Is that
No.
just where it's like, that's a fixed rate?
Well, so, man, I don't know what the rest of the industry is doing, to be perfectly honest. I'm sorry, I wish I was smarter about getting more bankers, but I don't. They don't like me. So, you know, right now, we're quoting 4% fixed, and that's where we're at on our construction stuff, and we seem to win a lot of deals, so I think that's competitive. But again, we do cap our legal fees, and that's another competitive edge that we have, and that's just really us promising that, hey, look, you know, we're not gonna have our lawyers go crazy on you. And yeah, we eat some of that legal fee every time. I think our average cost of legal costs is about 25 to 30 grand, which is what you should be expecting out of your lender. If you're doing a 9% deal and it costs you, you know, 30 or 40 grand from your, or 40 grand from your bank, you're paying too much. And so, you know, it just means that they're fighting over stuff they don't need to be fighting over.
Thank you. You touched on, you know, you guys have flexible prepayment, a lot of agency takeouts for what you guys put on the books. Mike or Jim, you want to touch on some of the forward 9% options with Freddie and Fannie? Any main differences between, you know, what we already talked about? Or?
Well, I mean, as Brian said, they're not very good. I mean, they have them. They're not great. They're 4.75 to 5. Brian mentioned 15 to 25 in legal. If you're talking about Fannie, Freddie, and the constructor, you're going to get a construction loan, you're probably north of 70. And so then you have this very involved arcing cost review, even more so than the investor. And the costs start to go up to the 6 figures, and you're thinking, for $1 million loan, why in the world would I ever sign for this? And no one's doing it. No one in the right mind is going to be for $1 million either. You probably should switch lenders. So that's why Brian is right. I mean, just that, what we're seeing in state, especially in state of Indiana. Jimmy, you said in New York City, when you're permed out at 9% deal, it could be $20+ million, and you need a longer term. Yeah, sure, that may make sense, but not in Indiana. I mean, every 9% deal I've seen has been under $3 million in firm debt, and go to a bank that can do that. And as Brian said, have that prepayment flexibility, where then you can go to an immediate 2.3 at an interest rate of 2s. You don't have to do the D4, you don't have to do all the expensive review of plans and specs. That really works well. Or just executing on because the 9% deals have small cash flow anyways, just executing on a cheaper, not relatively inexpensive 9% perm loans.
Yeah, and one of the things that's great about not doing the forward also, and using portfolio loans for the smaller loans, and I say under 3, using under 5, but I think under 3, is you move the pain, and I'm sorry that you guys are known for causing a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain in the execution of these more complicated things. I mean, you guys eat for me, it's amazing, right? So, but you move the pain from the closing process, which needs to be timed right, and the underwriting is far more intensive because they have to underwrite the construction, the inspections are more expensive all the way through. You move all that pain to the back end where there isn't really a timing constraint. There is no underwriting on construction, and it's an immediate funding, so there is no, I can't remember what that word you used was.
NAGR.
Yes, NAGR, which is my new word today. There is none of that. And at the end of the day, you just get a better overall experience for your actual development people. They appreciate not being under the gun to get all of that timing lined up. And, we can close a deal, start to finish. I think there's probably a developer in here that knows this, that we did a deal in Indiana in 21 days. And that's a construction firm all the way through. And so if you need a quick close, 21 days isn't necessarily something achievable by a for the most part. So, and even on that deal, I don't know if that developer is going to end up taking that to another Freddie Fannie immediate when it comes time. But there's a good chance it does. And we we've seen most of the deals, because we've got kind of a cool little spreadsheet that shows, all the different options. And most of the deals that we've priced out that are, kind of pay that extra fees, that flexibility, most of those deals we wind up flipping to that Freddie Fannie product. At the end of the day, there is enough of a gap. And it's normally, like you said, it's a big gap. And if you can knock a point of interest off of a 15-year loan, it's a big deal.
Yeah, so we've seen developers negotiate with syndicators a debt service coverage test at conversion versus a loan out for that exact reason. Where Brian issues, in Brian's example, he issues a commitment or he funds his loan and converts at let's just call it 4.5. And then you go get a HUD loan at 2.5. Well, obviously with a 35-year amortization. And so, now all of a sudden your debt service went way down. So maybe there's opportunity there to upsize your loan, pay developer fee.
Yeah, so, that's exactly correct. So we call it jumbo sizing. I don't, that's maybe your guys' new word. I created it. So we call it jumbo sizing, and it's exactly that. That debt service jumps all the way up to 2, and then they get a bunch more debt and pay off all their developer deferred developer fee. And
We've seen some syndicators push back and won't let us jumbo size. It's like that.
yeah.
And say, I approved $2 million loan amount, nothing above that. I was like, well, my debt service went down to $20,000. I can't support another $100,000. So that's something to think about when you're negotiating your LPAs with your syndicators.
Yes, we have seen syndicators push back, but it's also hard for the syndicator to say, no developer, we want your business next time, and no, you can't have your developer fee against the project's cash flows better than originally were. So we have seen them push back, but I think that the other thing they get upset about, the syndicators, they get upset at me about, is that it lowers the loss associated that they were expecting on the interest, which lowers the yield overall, which could affect pricing. And we've seen that in a couple instances where, we've gone from a 5% to a 2%, and all of a sudden, you get the call from the syndicator saying, hey, you're killing our loss, which is affecting our yield. But our answer is pretty much our answer that we always say, what's best for the project, guys? Right? And that's the motto we live by. And there isn't a syndicator out there, hopefully, that we want to do business with that isn't going to say, this is obviously best for the project. To make sure that it's cash flowing well, to make sure it's stabilized, to make sure that it's going to be a successful long-term venture.
Thanks, Brian. We've got about 8 minutes. I do want to touch on, we could talk about jumbo loans all day. That'd be great, but we do want to touch on, a different scenario, say re-syndication or an acquisition, bridge financing, flexible capital within affordable housing. What are you guys seeing as the best options there? Is there private placement options? Is agency a good play there? Just
Let me talk about Fannie Freddie ARMs, and you can talk about your bridge. The best product for acquisitions that we've used is the Fannie Freddie ARM. It's a 7-year ARM. It's open for prepayments after 1 year. It floats. It's a variable rate over SOFR. We just quoted one. I think it was a 280 spread over SOFR, which is 5 bips right now. No, 4. So that's pretty good. Typically, it's 75% loan to value. I think we can push Freddie up to 80 for select sponsors. But it's very flexible if you're buying an asset, you're looking to re-syndicate down the road, or if there's value add, it's a great option.
Yeah, so being a bank of merchants, we have our own bridge product, and I know that other non-banks borrow from banks and have their own bridge product. It's not just all through Fannie Freddie, right? So we have seen probably the most aggressive financing for this type of asset, where you're in your past your compliance period and you're just sort of spending through your bonds and your tax credits, and you're sort of bridging that re-syndication. So what we have done is underwrote sort of a senior loan to the cash flow, the existing cash flow of the asset, and then underwrite the mezzanine or B piece up to, I mean, for some select sponsors, we've done all the way up the capital stack. For certain sponsors with strong balance sheets, that's what banks call us crazy. I told you, you get called crazy. I told them we get called crazy too. But we underwrite the B piece, the mezz loan, in some instances for certain sponsors all the way up to 90, 100, even in some instances. Again, that's the developer's ability to resyndicate the project. And with some of these sponsors, like a Herman and Kittle, I mean, they do that in their sleep. And we feel pretty good about that risk profile. And so for them, especially if it's an acquisition, where you don't have to raise outside capital to then flip it to a resyndication, that's really, really attractive. So we've been doing that. But we're seeing debt funds come in the market. So debt funds are, essentially where you raise capital, you leverage, non-banks can go make these loans, and we've seen them be pretty aggressive, up to 90%. So this type of financing is very attractive. And so then, Peter, just to be clear, then once you execute on the bridge, on your takeout, it really just mirrors what Jim and I already talked about. You're still looking at the development or private placement. So we've already talked about that, but that interim period, again, getting the different bridge loan options, and even with Freddie, Jim, maybe you talked about this with Freddie. Isn't there ability where you can forward block your TEL after you get maybe your approval on bonds? Do you know? Because that's really attractive to take your interest rate risk off of your.
You can. You need to feel very secure about your bond award.
Yeah.
Because there are ones you kind of lock where you break your trust. But if you know you're getting bonds, it's just a matter of time. That's a great execution.
Yeah, so you think about the takeout of that acquisition is a brand new TEL, new tax credits, and there's interest rate risk there. That's the primary risk. And so to take that off the table a year in advance will be really attractive. So that's one of the benefits of using the agencies for the bridge.
Right, for say a rehab deal, or just an immediate deal, you're looking at your project in year 15 of its life, are agencies taking a harder look on collections just as a result of COVID or any other sort of things like that have come of it from a result of COVID that agencies are taking a stance on, or even HUD? Reserves?
So I think if it's Section 8, they are really trying to understand relocation plans. How are you getting them the units and doing the rehab and moving the tenants around? If it's non-Section 8, we just haven't seen a lot of immediates, especially if you're going to lift rents a bit. They're currently below existing tax credit. The loans currently below AMI. I think the agencies are saying, well, can you get in there in a year or two, rehab these units? Is that number one? And then are you going to go in there and raise the rents on them in the middle of a pandemic? It's a little tough to sort of sell, so that's when we're seeing more forwards, D4s and forwards. So because yes, they are concerned with that.
So we see a lot of scenarios too where we're coming up with year 15 and we've got a limited partner that's looking to get bought out. So you could look at this as a preservation scenario where you want to put together low capital or cheap capital for long-term debt. We've used a lot of 223Fs. Is that still, can you beat that? Is that the best way to?
Bank Freddie B's are pretty attractive. Where that, Jim? Like 3%? Yeah. So here's what I will tell you about that. If you're not doing repairs and your project's 15 years old, you go right into HUD, you're going to get hammered on your PCNA. Your reserves are going to be crazy high. So I've seen that's where we go to Fannie and Freddie, do it immediate. Fannie and Freddie, there's no such thing as an IDRR, and you'll have minimal repairs. And at the 3% rate with that versus a 2.5% interest rate, but you got $8,000 a unit. That's your IDRR, right? And it's the agencies are quicker. Fannie and Freddie are quicker.
Good deal. Well, that really gets us through, the topics we want to cover. I think we've got about 6 minutes left, so we did want to open this up for questions.
Can I say something just real
Yeah,
quick
go
on
ahead.
the preservation side?
Sure.
Preservation of the 9% world, the smaller deals that are coming out of their compliance period, or even nearing that, we're really competitive in, giving them another 15-year loan. And so, again, our interest rates aren't much different, 450, 425, even on the smaller deals as they exit that 15 years to get them all the way through their restricted rent period. And so that's been a very competitive product, and we've seen people take advantage of those even in year, say, 10. Because some of those prepayment penalties are really small by that period. And if you've got still a 7% interest rate out there that you got 10 years ago, it's really attractive to jump down to a 4% now and get a 15 or 20-year fixed rate loan from us. So we do a lot of that. I don't know if other banks are out there doing a lot of that
Do
too.
you finance any improvements? Will you allow that?
Sure. I mean, as long as the LTV meets our requirements, we lend up to the LTV that we think is appropriate for the property and the NOI. But yeah, absolutely, we've been additional funds for sure. Based on the capital needs assessment, obviously. But yeah.
Just one thing to note, for anybody who's got FHA loans in their portfolio, to look at an A7 or an IRR. So an A7 allows you to recast the debt up to what the original loan balance was at lower rate. An IRR allows you to just adjust down the rate to the current FHA.
Yeah, we've had some tax credit deals where they were D4s, and we've done, I think, 2 IRRs since 2018. It's crazy. Because you can cover the penalty in the new rate, and then what we've seen in the rate environment, it's been pretty remarkable. So definitely look at that. It's a good point.
We've had a few projects that have gotten their final endorsement. 2 days later, we're looking at the IRR, so it's
Yeah, think about that. So 3 years ago, you were probably doing a D4 rate over 4, okay? Over 4%. Today, you could go to an IRR, you're gonna have, even with 10% penalty, you can go sell a Ginnie Mae at a premium, cover the 10% penalty, and lock an interest rate in the mid-3s. So as a developer, you're thinking, okay, I have 0 cost. It takes about 45 days to get approved in HUD. My rate literally just went from 4.30 to 3.5. Where it's almost like, am I missing something? But no, it's legit. We've been doing it quite a bit.
Yeah, it's no brainer. So, yeah, we will open up the questions now. David, I think that's all that.
Brian, I was wondering if you could clarify for me again the flexibility on the prepay. Did you say it was 1% for 6 months?
Yeah, so we give the option of paying an origination fee up front on the perm loan, which we normally don't have any fees associated with. So we normally have no fees. We give 1%, and then it's after the conversion of the perm, you've got about 6 months to get that into another product. But the truth is, you're dealing with me, and if we've got a good relationship and you want 7 months or 8 months and it's 9 months in, and you call me up and I'll be like, yeah, that's fine. So, yeah, I mean, to us, it's all about relationships and getting the next deal. So, is it a hard 6 months? No, absolutely not. It's, if for some reason these guys are taking too long, or I'm not saying that you guys are but if there's a hang up, or if we're waiting on FHLB funds, or if we're doing something weird, like, you pay me that 1%, I'm gonna let you get out, right? Not 9 years down the road, okay? But yeah, somewhere reasonable.
So I have a question. Are you guys members of Federal Home Bank? Federal Home Bank?
So we are the members of Federal Home Loan Bank of Cincinnati. We are not members of Federal Home Bank of Indiana, which I actually had like an hour-long conversation with the lady trying to figure out how to do that.
But I say that because I think you brought up the point earlier, I think it may have been missed here, because you get points on your application if you're the construction and the perm lender. So Brian's idea about converting onto his loan before you go to a HUD loan with a bellwether or merchants allows you to continue to score with FHLB.
Yeah.
You said earlier, I just want to make sure.
So we do that with FHLB Cincinnati. We are by far the largest winner of HP in FHLB Cincinnati. We get about 30% of all of AHP every year. And we're looking to do the same thing with Indiana. It's exactly the same thing. So that and you actually miss all of their underwriting tests this way too. Because FHLB has caps for debt service and things like that. So you convert, you wait, you get your funds, everything's good, everybody's happy. They do their final analysis, and then you convert to something else that there's nothing that we're doing wrong other than not waiving the fee. We're just waiving the repayment penalty. And you're doing what's right for the project, which again is very hard for anyone to argue against. This is the best thing for the project, right?
Any other questions? Anyone in the front? No? Questions up there?
With yourself
Okay.
or others?
You've got 1 minute, so.
Did you guys understand everything they said?